Vulnerability in terms of leadership really refers to, I think, leaders who show their emotions and are willing and able to do that in the hope that it builds team resilience, team trust. But vulnerability in leadership is also sometimes associated with weakness, and that can maybe be a traditional way, I think, of viewing the word vulnerability and that, what it brings up for people. So we were very interested when we were kind of seeing this term out there in the zeitgeist associated with leadership, how people, square that circle, if you like, and what it might mean to bring vulnerability into leadership in practice. And we didn't know the answer to that question when we were chatting about it in the team, but we happened to find two people who did. And they're sitting on either side of me here this morning, and we're very, very fortunate to have two extremely experienced leaders from our sector, from our membership, and we're delighted that they have joined us here this morning in Kildare. So I will introduce them and then we'll get into the conversation. We will speak for about 45 minutes here, the three of us. We're going to explore all aspects of this vulnerability piece. Then we're going to give you an opportunity to discuss, to chat, to reflect on some of what you've heard in the conversation here today with each other for a while, and then we'll come back towards the end before we finish up at 11:30 for questions. So you may have questions for the panel. You'll get a chance to ask those after you've had those discussions with each other. So I'm joined by, first of all, Dr. Tracey A. Monson, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Daughters of Charity Child and Family Services. Tracey has a wide and varied academic practice and leadership background in the area, working with children, young people and families in need, from early intervention to protective services. Tracey has worked at a national and cross-border level with statutory and governmental bodies to advance the agenda for children's issues and has held various senior management positions within child and family services and within the community and voluntary sector. In addition, she has lectured and has a number of academic publications, and she's worked in the community and voluntary sector for all of her career and is passionate about the work of this sector. John Church is the CEO of the Irish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the ISPCC. He joined the ISPCC in August 2018, having spent 16 years in the private sector in various senior marketing roles in blue-chip organisations such as the Bank of Ireland Group, Coca-Cola Company. During an exciting and important period of change within the ISPCC, John brings significant experience in the areas of strategy development, organisational change, planning, commercial focus, as the organisation seeks to reposition its Childline Service brand to expand supports to more children in the mental health and wellbeing area. And John is a graduate of UCD and the KUL in Belgium. Thank you both for joining us today. I remember when Sharon came back, having had separate chats with both of you, because she has conversations with leaders across the sector and she meets with people all the time, and she came back to me and she said, I've had these two conversations separately, and the word vulnerability, or this piece about vulnerability in leadership, came up organically in both conversations. And she said, I think there's something here, and I think we need to bring these two people together. So I think that's where the kind of genesis of today's conversation comes from. And I suppose I'm just going to ask you each first to tell us a little bit about your role and where that vulnerability comes in, or what you mean by vulnerability. And I might ask you first, Tracey, to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. It's an interesting concept, and it's not something that you name. I mean, we all talk about transformational leadership and authentic leadership and all those kind of things. I think for me, vulnerability is around having a sense of self-awareness. So as a leader, knowing your own limitations and knowing when you don't have all the answers and that you're able to seek answers. And I think part of that is also around coming from a value base. So knowing that when you're working to your values and those values are aligned with those of your organisation, it flows extremely well. I think in terms of vulnerability, it's knowing when you haven't got everything right and when you need to say, look, I don't have all the answers, I didn't get everything right, I'm sorry that I didn't hear what you said or I didn't follow up or whatever the case may be. I think it's around holding yourself to account, but being transparent in that. So being able to be honest with people and seek input back. So even though you mightn't have all the answers, it's asking, well, what else what else would you feel I could do differently? So seeking that feedback, being open to hearing it and also acting on it. So I think for me, that really is what vulnerability is. So knowing that when you we talked about bringing your whole self to work earlier, John and I, but when you bring yourself to work, it's not a persona. So of course you have to step into a leadership role, and sometimes you have to make hard decisions, sometimes you have to be directive, sometimes there has to be this is the way it is, but that doesn't mean that you're not being authentic or vulnerable. It means that people know that when you are speaking or engaging with them, they trust who you are and they trust that you're coming from a place of value and purpose, and that's the authenticity and the vulnerability that you have been able to show. And I think that's really what it would present and how I think it would come to life in the work setting.
Thanks, Tracey. John, I might ask you a similar question. Can you tell us what about your role and what vulnerability means to you in that?
Feeling very vulnerable now in the church, my surname. I think my role, other people think my role is to have all the answers. And I don't have all the answers, although Sharon thinks we do have the answers to vulnerability. My role is to ensure that I have better people than I have around me. That's not so I can put my feet up and not do any work. It's because they do the job better than I do. And I didn't always think like that. Because I always had this, sort of years ago, I would have come in and thinking, I need to have all the answers. I'm the CEO, people are looking up to me. And when I joined the organization, there was this very pyramidal, everything was pushed up to say, well, we're not going to make any decisions. Let's give it up to the SLT and the CEO because they make decisions. And that just freaked me out when I joined. People have been paid to do a job and they're capable of making better decisions than I am because they're better at the job. So for me, that was relatively easy in this role, but it didn't come easy in my previous roles. And I think it was because, excuse me, about 5 years ago, I employed a coach. And now there's a lot of coaches out there, and they're not all what they make out to be. But this was a really good coach, and I started working with him during COVID. So we couldn't stay indoors, and it was walk and talk, which was brilliant. So my team thought I was just off having a walk in the Killiney Hills, which I was, but I was actually doing work which benefited everybody. But I really enjoyed it. It was like 4 hours walking the hills, and it was way better than staying in an office having a chat opposite the table, because you get very creative. Like, when you have a child and you want to talk about an issue with a child, they say, don't sit them down face to face, take them for a walk so they're not looking at you. So I started to break my own barriers down. I think COVID was a big turning point for me personally. And I got a little bit more real. I mean, you mentioned bringing your whole self to work, Tracey. You can't bring your entire self to work because you freak everybody out. But at the end of the day, being yourself. So there's a great example for me that I thought when it was the 20-something of March 2020. Don't want to bring you all the way back to that. And we all went on Microsoft Teams. None of us really knew how to use it. By the end of the week, we were absolutely shattered having these chats. But we all had to pull ourselves together. We all had to, stand up for let's all be strong here. On the Friday, I just was so exhausted and knackered. I just said, guys, I don't know about you, but I'm really stressed. I am really tired. Can we not talk about work? And everybody just went, Jesus Christ, I'm glad you said that. And we spent the entire hour on Microsoft Teams just talking about how we felt. And it didn't reflect badly on me. And I was going to say, geez, that worked. And I feel much better now. So we started talking about that quite a lot in our teams with the senior leadership team. We have two team meetings a week. One is on a Tuesday, it's operational. So there are all the issues. Thursday is strategic. Unless there's something really bad happening in the organization, we don't talk about it. We talk about strategy. Because we're always being accused of not talking about strategy, because day to day gets... So Thursday, for an hour and a half, it's all about strategy. But we started creating this group. What type of group do we want to be? Do we trust each other? And that got into the whole allowing yourself being vulnerable. Don't know whether I've answered it, but...
I think, we've opened up a number of really interesting paths there, John. Thank you. Tracey, did you have an aha moment? Kind of John is describing there how he kind of eased himself into the vulnerability, the coaching, the kind of taking that chance. Were there moments like that, or do you feel it's a bit more kind of subtly woven into your work?
I think John is absolutely right with COVID. I think it challenged absolutely everybody. And I think all bets were off. It was a case of we are all just trying to survive. And I think it gave a huge amount of, I suppose, realization that we have to do things differently and we have to work differently together. And I think what we tended to focus on, and I think John is right when he talks about, having that space to just say, this is crap, lads. My God, how's everybody doing? Because you have to do that. And it's okay to do that, because I think what we tended to do was focus on, we've got to keep going for the service. We've got to, get the services back up. We've got to stay open. We've got to get rosters in place. We've got to get our PPE. But also, we need to acknowledge that everyone else is going through COVID. All of the staff are going through COVID. So we all have to meet people where they're at and acknowledge that people are all going through personal trauma. And that was what it was. It was personal trauma. And it was around that piece. So I thought absolutely COVID was critical in that regard. I think what I think has helped me a huge amount is, I suppose, thinking about being a leader, it's really around your followers. So it's the people that you lead. And if the people that you lead are able to communicate with you. So what I would do is I'd go out, we've 17 centres around Leinster, so I'd visit those 2 or 3 times a year. It would be an informal coffee. It's a case of, I'm here for conversation. I don't have an agenda. I just want to hear how you're getting on. Tell me what's working, tell me what's not working, and tell me what we can do better. And I think the vulnerability is you hear everything. Now, initially you didn't, so that's okay. It's a nice coffee and they're very welcoming and scones and all that. But as the trust goes on, or as the staff realise, or the teams that you do want to hear, then they will tell you. And I think that's the vulnerability over time. But what's more important, I think, is after those sessions, is you follow up, you commit. So you say, so I'm hearing what you're saying. I can do something about this. I can't do anything about that, but I acknowledge it. It's a challenge. And I will come back to you on this. And then it's following up. So it's staying true to your word. Your word is your bond, I think. And that's the vulnerability piece, is being able to go back and say, I heard what you said. It was difficult for you to say it, but I acknowledge it. Thank you for being so honest, and I'm following up on this bit. And that then builds the trust, because then there's an openness, and I think that's been hugely, I suppose, transformative in terms of building that trust and that relationship, in terms of vulnerability. So, yeah.
That word trust actually is interesting, because that you just reminded me about, and in the same sentence as vulnerability, is an environment that allows people to make mistakes, or learning experiences as they stay across the water. But that's huge. Like in Ireland, we're not great at allowing mistakes or tolerating mistakes. Another example in an organisation, I'm not going to name it, but one of my team put in a manual error. Like, it was one mistake they made in a financial forecast. They put in a figure which was wrong in the forecast. And basically, I trusted the numbers were right. We subsequently found out they were wrong. But, and I had to go back to the board and say, listen, total responsibility, the figures were wrong. And one of the individuals on the board said, well, where I came from, that's a firing offence. And I says, well, not where you are now, because if you look up on the wall in our boardroom, we have a set of values, and then we talk about behaviours as well. And I says, well, there are values, and firing somebody for one human error is not part of our values. So I'm not going to fire the individual. And if you want to continue to be on the board, you really need to live the values, because I don't want a set of values on the board and a set of values in the executive. We all have to have the same values. And that was a good discussion, because the only time you talk about values is when you're doing your annual report, and then it gets thrown up. But you have to live that, and that was a great example of being okay to, like, I used to hate making mistakes when I was in my first career, and I would have hidden a few and not been honest about it, and then suddenly realizing actually being honest about it builds your profile and builds your trust, and it's much, much less stressful.
So is the way then to create a culture where mistakes are okay, is it to be open, to be vulnerable about your own mistakes, or what do you do to work against that societal piece, I suppose, that you meant?
Yeah, I have a fantastic director of people, not a HR director, a director of people. She's from the pharmaceutical sector, and she's working with us on language and how, we don't use the word mistakes. We don't actually, because as I said to my kid one day who refused to say he makes mistakes, I said, well, isn't it brilliant to be born perfect? You were born, you're the only human in the entire world who's never going to make a mistake. And he didn't know how to answer that, but it was, and then he just said, well, you're just being cynical, Dad, as you always are. But it is about allowing somebody to make that error or that learning, because you'll build on it, and you'll actually end up with a better environment, and a more open and authentic discussion and conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really, really important. You're absolutely right, John. I think there's something as well about us as leaders being able to admit when we have made a mistake or to apologise. So I remember during COVID, there was a lot going on in terms of just all the PPE stuff, because we have 17 different centres, we needed staff in, they were all on site, and there was a big problem happening in one of them. And I remember I was on one of the senior leadership team meetings, and one of the senior people said something, and I remember I just snapped, and then I went, you know what, I'm really sorry about that. So that wasn't about you. I shouldn't have done that, and I apologise. And I think that just, because they know that's not the way I would generally react, but it was just being able to have that, I shouldn't have done it, I apologised. And I think when you do that as a leader, then there's trust. And as you said, in terms of the mistake piece, people make mistakes. What is the word now? I'll start thinking whatever your director of people is. Yeah, but errors of judgment or whatever, learning experiences, and it is the learning piece. It is around what do we need to do differently next time, or and we tend to take the blame a good bit as leaders. I think in terms of you're taking the responsibility because it's your team.
I feel the responsibility. If you're behind on your numbers, my immediate reaction is, geez, what do I do? And then I go, well, hang on a sec, it's not entirely my job to turn it round. And this happened yesterday, actually, because we're kind of behind in one area, and I put it back to the team, and they started working together to come up with better ideas than me. Psychological safety is the word we use. And Simon Sinek, does anybody read Simon Sinek? He's brilliant. And he talks about psychology. So that's one of my roles, I think, is to help foster that environment where it's safe to talk and safe to express views. Now, you can't always express everything, because both of us would be in board meetings that it wouldn't be appropriate sometimes to talk about stuff with your team.
Exactly. Yeah.
And are there lines like that are tricky to sometimes navigate, between this is information that I can share, this is where I can be vulnerable, but in certain areas I can't necessarily because I'm a leader?
Yeah, I find that tricky sometimes because, if you're behind on your fundraising, you'd have some directors, saying, well, where's the problem? Who's to blame? And you kind of know where the issues are yourself, but coming back and sort of blaming the individual then is difficult. You've got to, I feel myself taking a lot of the hits, which my team thanked me for it every now and again. I remember when I first joined, my first question to everyone is, did anybody apply for the job? And nobody did. And someone says, why would I want that sort of job? I said, thanks very much for the support, So in some ways I was seen as this battering ram or this Trojan horse with the board, where I'm trying to break that down. But definitely, there's obviously information that it's a difficult thing because the team will say, well, we're going to make the forecast, we're confident, keep the buzz going. And then I'm going into the board meeting and trying to relay that. And trying to get the balance between reality and being overly positive. But you've got to keep the team motivated to get your targets. Unless you're 100% funded by the state, which we're not. So.
But even if you are 100% funded by the state, which we are, there's still difficulties because you're at the mercy then of the state in terms of grant aid agreements and SLAs and things like that. Yeah. But I agree with you, it's difficult. I suppose being the battering ram, I think what I've learned is you take the hit, but you sit down with the person afterwards and you say, look guys, we can't have this happen again. Okay, it's not helpful for us to have to get into defence mode the whole time or have to try and explain. We need to be driving strategy. We need to be doing what we do best. So how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again? What do we need to do differently? And sometimes it's about putting additional measures in to just check in. That's work sometimes. But I think it's, look, I've taken the hit, but we can't do this again. So I think you're holding it, but you're using it as a learning experience in terms of driving it. And your point about the board is well made. And I think we have a board that are completely driven by values and purpose. So we're founded by the Daughters to Charity. We have 2 daughters on our board, but we have they're directors. So we have directors. It's a company limited by guarantee and a charity, but they're all there because they've either worked in the sector or they have something to add in terms of finance or IT or whatever the case may be. And the values piece is important. So if there's difficult decisions or conflict, if we bring it back to the values, that resolves it. So if we feel that we have a difficult decision to make, if we think of our values, which are honesty, justice, compassion, respect and dignity, are we living those values? Is this decision going to conflict with those values, be it for service users or staff or funders or whatever the case may be? And that's the vulnerability as well, as being able to make a decision. You had a really great example of that, John, when we talked around funding. That's really about really living your values and putting your money where your mouth is in terms of these are too important to us.
Oh, thanks for reminding me of that, actually, yeah. Because that really tested me. So we had, it's what's quite common in this sector, as I'm sure there'll be a few nodding heads when I say this, is that you chase the money and you forget about who you are and you forget about your purpose because, well, you've got to get the money in and you've got to pay staff, you've got to pay everything. We had a great example of this before Christmas where we were dealing with an external supplier who wanted us to be set up in a certain way. I have to be a little bit economic with the truth here, but not the truth, but the information. They wanted us to set up in a certain way, and the contract was delivered in a certain way that was spotted by somebody on our board that would make us, it would contravene our purpose and would contravene our Articles of Association, yet it was worth like a 6-figure sum to us. And like I'm kind of saying, well, can we just change our constitution? Like, not change it entirely, but just tweak it so that we can be a supplier to a private company, which would have been a no-no. And I looked at it at the board and I says, you're absolutely right. This is not the right thing to do. In fact, the better way to do it is for us to go another route. So I went, oh no, I'm going to have a really difficult conversation. First of all, I had it with my team to say, listen, this is what we're about. This is why we exist. This is our Simon Sinek purpose. Why? I'm about to go back to this organisation and say we can't work with them unless it's like this. Are you good with that? Absolutely. So I went back, had the conversation before Christmas. They weren't happy because it was a private organisation, but they understood that it couldn't work, and they wanted us to work. They needed us as much as we needed them, and they figured out, right, well, now we need to work a different way. So I came away incredibly relieved, but also just really happy and definitely relieved. That feeling in the stomach was gone because I actually did the right thing instead of chase that money, which, like, the children would have a benefit at the end of the day. That's what we're there for. But the way we were doing it would have really sort of asked more questions about our constitution then.
And that's the conflict with your values. So I find that piece is, if it conflicts with the values of the organisation, it's never going to sit right, because we're all driven by purpose. So it might work for a period of time, but it won't, because it's never going to align. So there's something about that in terms of the value, the purpose and the values.
Can I ask you, Tracey, a little bit about how you notice the team responds to this, I suppose, practice of vulnerability, or, that empathetic leadership? What do you notice in the way that it operates within the team then, more broadly?
So I think within the senior leadership team, there's definitely a different dynamic has grown. So there's a much more stronger sense of trust and relationship. I think people feel, as John said, the psychological safety piece. And psychological safety is, you might have one or two people that say nothing in a team and everyone else is okay. But that's a difficulty, because then people don't feel psychologically safe because someone is sharing or saying something in terms of their own vulnerability, but it isn't being reciprocated. So that's a challenge. So there's something about being able to build that over time. I think it's I suppose, mentoring people as well, and being able to, bring people to a place where they feel comfortable. So I think in the SLT, you definitely will see it. I think where I see it most is we have 180 staff, so I see it there hugely. And how I see it is, we had we celebrate St. Louise every year, so she's our founder. Our founder's the Dorset Charity, so we had a wonderful day away in May. 2 weeks ago, we went to Belmont Domain in Greystones, and it was just a well-being day for all the staff. And there was just people were coming over, they were walking beside me, they were chatting, it was just a warmth and just an engagement. Just people felt really, really comfortable. People were telling me things about themselves. I make it my business to know everybody, know their names, know something that's going on. So getting to know people personally is hugely important as well, in terms of knowing that person, not just the work person. So I think that's how you would see it. And even, I suppose, recently we were recruiting we've a new strategy in development, so putting together a strategic steering committee, and I was looking for 12 to 15 people. I got 40 people coming forward, which we never would have done previously. So people just really wanting to be part of the future of the organisation. So I think that's how you see it in terms of your followers. So again, leadership, it's your followers. That's how it manifests in terms of the followers or the people that you lead.
That engagement, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that. I actually had an old boss of mine called it a "Hey Martha" moment. It's like a headline where the hubby says, "Hey Martha, come in here and have a look at this." It was a big moment yesterday, because if I go back 5 years, when I joined, the main reason for joining the ISPCC was what we do. It was Childline. It's this amazing service. Imagine having this service where you're 24 hours a day, you're talking to children and you're helping them build their resilience. But childhood is completely different now than it was 36 years ago when it was created. And we weren't changing at the rate fast enough to be relevant or to remain relevant. So one big part of my role was to facilitate change in culture, which meant change in people. So, with my coach walking in Killiney, he's introduced me to this guy called Frederick Laloux. Well, he wasn't physically there, but I don't know whether anybody's read Frederick Laloux, Reinventing Organizations. And I just turned around and said, "You must be joking. If I introduce that now, they'd throw me out." It was so radical. But over time, and thanks to COVID, and thanks to the way we started building that psychological safety with the team, and the realization that we have to change the way we work, we have to change the way we deliver our services, the way we act. Like, our audience is children and young people under 18. Yet we weren't behaving like them, we weren't really including them as much as we should. So I slowly started introducing a concept that he talks about. It's a teal. So he has different organizations of different colors. And the long and the short of it is the difference between a hierarchical organization and a flat. And a flatter organization, there's much, much more self-management, empowerment, less management, which you can imagine if I introduced that too early, it was a bit nervous. Whereas most of us are hierarchical. There's layers, and then people come in and say, "How can I get up the ladder?" So yesterday, we were talking about strategy, and having introduced the concept on a walk and talk with my team 2 years ago, they're starting to now talk about how can we set ourselves up to be more self-management and empowered. And they were saying, "You remember that Frederick guy we were talking about 2 years ago?" So I went, wow, this is pretty cool, because they're starting to be open to being flat and not worrying about what their job title is. I thought that was amazing. Not being worried about your title. Because I had to first say, listen, if we take this to its nth degree, if you look at Patagonia and a couple of other organizations, they're teal organizations, really flat, there's no CEO. And I says, I have to be prepared to do myself out of a job here.
That's ultimate vulnerability, yeah.
There you go. It's pretty stupid as well sometimes, but no, you have to be prepared to take the lead on it and just say, listen, if we really want this, because if we get there, this is going to be so powerful. And they all agree. Now they're really behind it.
All the language is there. We're coming towards the end of the conversation that we'll have here. There will be an opportunity for questions to the panel after your own discussion, so please hold on to those moments if they're there for you. I suppose if there's people here in the room who might already be practicing kind of this vulnerable leadership, or who might be thinking about, this is something I'd like to begin to explore. Is there advice in terms of where to start or how to begin to have that conversation with yourself or your team?
Yeah, I think people are probably doing it already, but haven't really realised it. So there's something about thinking about how you lead if you're in a leadership position, and think about how those that you lead perceive you. And I would feel that a good way to do it is to ask people. So, and again, it's not about putting it out there in a survey monkey or anything like that. It's having a conversation with one or two people that you have a relationship with, and asking, look, is there anything you feel that I could do differently? Do you feel that, you can bring things to me? Do you feel that I'm open and honest and trustworthy? So there's something around doing a check-in. And I think the other important thing is it's the value piece. It's around looking at your own values, seeing if they're aligned with those of your organisation, and are you actually leading through your values? I suppose that's the vulnerability piece. I think it's quite, we could all do that on an ongoing basis, but it's that self-reflection piece and that kind of, yeah.
Thanks, Tracey. Yeah. John, same question to you. What's a good starting point, do you think, for people?
I kind of have two things. One was, again, during a coaching journey and the whole being vulnerable, park the ego. That's what he basically said. It's not about you. Don't worry about how people feel about you, and it's not about you looking good. Because actually one of the board directors said to me that your best legacy that you will leave behind is your senior leadership team, not you. And it took me time to figure that out because, it's so park the ego. And then the other bit, which I love, is catch somebody doing something good. Because we always focus on the negativity. Our brains are wired for the fight and flight. That's why newspapers sell. Because imagine newspapers selling happy, flappy news every day, they wouldn't sell. So we're always focusing on what went wrong as opposed to what went right. And that's something, catch somebody doing something good.
Great, thanks John. And we always finish up these conversations by asking our panellists for the best piece of leadership advice that you received. So, that word in the ear, or, something maybe that you've read or you've seen in action. What kind of advice would you like to pass on?
Yeah, there's been so many, but I was thinking about this. I think I had a coach a number of years ago, Lynn Payton. She was absolutely amazing. And she always said to me, your word is your bond. If you say you will do something, you do it. You follow through. You don't let it slip. So that's been really, really powerful, I think, in terms of just holding yourself to account and following through. So when you say you'll do something or follow up, you do it, regardless of what that looks like. So yeah, that's been something I've tried to live by.
Thanks, Tracey.
Catch someone doing something good.
A good idea is worth repeating.
Yeah. That's probably it. But also, I kind of read a lot of stuff from Harvard Business Review. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So COG and take some ideas from that, and think actually getting an external coach or somebody you can talk to. Because you can't always say everything to your team. You can't say everything to your board. So have somebody that you can bounce things off.
Great. Thank you both. It's been a really enjoyable conversation for me anyway, and I hope it has been the same for yourselves. The invitation now over the next 20 minutes or so is to refresh your coffee, your tea. If there are any scones left, please feel free to take them. And to gather, you can pull chairs around if you like, or mix around and have a conversation about what you've heard. Any aha moments, any questions that it's prompted for you, or any good examples that you've seen of vulnerability in action. And then we'll gather back here in about 20 minutes, and you'll have a chance then to ask questions of the panel before we finish up. Thank you.
Thank you.